My Nolly, my grandfather, was born 2 years after his family returned from the long walk, Fort Sumner, 1870, and lived to be 102 years old. He had a garden that was watered by rainfall, and it was his life. He grew lots of different fruits and vegetables and never had to go to the store to buy food. When he felt it was needed, he went out to make offerings for rain, and it would rain. In this way, he lived a long and healthy life, as many people in his generation did.
You know, back in the olden days, Mother Earth was first created. We had a lot of vegetation, a lot of water, and there was life. And then, as we multiplied, us five-fingered people, we messed up our own air. We're living under the smoke. We can't see, but it's there. Those, I think, is causing global warming, climate change.
Impacts to indigenous people from climate change are really well documented in the Arctic, where climate change has gotten considerable attention from the scientific community. But we wanted to know if some of the many changes on the Navajo Nation could be attributable to climate change, so we focused our studies there.
In the southwestern U.S., near Four Corners, is the Navajo Nation.
What we found is that people with homelands in arid environments are especially vulnerable because of declining snowfall and increasing temperature.
The Navajo people today still practice a lifestyle deeply connected to their natural surroundings. Continuing drought threatens the very existence of Navajo culture and the survival of traditional Navajo communities. Yet there has not been a lot of scientific research on tribal lands.
The USGS is working to address this lack of data and to help the Navajo Nation adapt to climate change trends, which are expected to continue. My work includes a combination of both local and traditional knowledge, along with conventional scientific investigations. And I also wanted to encourage and inspire young people to develop an interest in science and to combine that interest with the concern for the land to help the Navajo Nation in the challenges that they face today.
Since the 1990s, the Western Navajo Nation has had prolonged drought with very low rainfall. 2009 had less than 3 inches of rain the entire year. Weather patterns have changed drastically. Summer monsoon rains are less frequent, but more severe in intensity. This is causing a lot of changes to the landscape and the whole ecosystem.
The streams are all gone. We used to have water seeping out of the rocks. Springs that used to have water all the time are gone. The last few years, the ground has been dry. We've had nothing but sandstorms around planting season, and the winds just killed the plants. The corn, the squash, the watermelons, the wind just killed it.
Many Farms Lake is one of the largest lakes on the Navajo Nation here. And right now, at top level, it should be holding 16,000 acre-feet. Right now, the depth is 3 feet. Most of it is silt at the bottom, and how climate change has changed that, and we're getting less and less water flowing into this lake.
Right now, we have 4 main wells that people use all the time, but you have to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning. By 8, the water's all gone. People have to drive 20 to 25 miles just to get water, and the roads out here are really bad.
Drying conditions here result from less rain, less snow, increased winds, and warming temperatures.
The big snow, as I remember, was 1968. It was about 3 feet of snow out where I live, and that was wet snow. And then the last snow that was deep was 1981, about 1981. Since then, we haven't had any snow that deep. It's usually not more than 2 inches.
Since the 1930s, average snow depth has dropped by 2/3, from almost a foot to just under 4 inches. Before 1982, there had not been a recorded year with almost no accumulated snow depth. Between 2002 and 2011, there were 8 years with no or almost no snow. The lack of snowfall has a dramatic effect on desert rivers, like the Little Colorado. In the stretch between Winslow and Loop, Arizona, USGS scientists have found that the average width has decreased 90%, from 1,250 feet to 100 feet.
This is Navajo Hopi Wash that flows through Tuba City here. That was a major agricultural area, not just for the Navajos, but also for the Hopis, and a lot of their cornfields for the Hopi were also grown in that area and irrigated by Navajo Hopi Wash. And it hasn't been flowing all year long since the 1980s. The same is true for the Chinle Wash. The last time this reach of Chinle Wash was flowing all year long was in the 1980s. So over time, fewer and fewer reaches of these streams have flown all year long. And now we have just this one area of one of the major tributaries to the Colorado River is the only place left where we have water flowing all year.
Extensive drought has brought another dramatic change to the landscape: migrating sand dunes.
Migrating sand dunes are a constant threat now with climate change and are burying houses and roads. The USGS is conducting research to better understand sand dune movement on the Navajo Nation.
The reservation's land has loose, sandy soil. It's easily picked up by wind and shaped into sand dunes and sand sheets. Now sand covers nearly 1/3 of the Navajo Nation. The USGS chose to study the Grand Falls Dune Field because it was accessible, and it is one of many that was downwind of the Little Colorado River. So it's similar to areas where thousands of Navajo people live. The Grand Falls Dune Field was formed between 1935 and 1953. USGS research included multiple field surveys from 2009 through 2012. Data collection included meteorological monitoring, vegetation transects, surface mapping, aerial and satellite imagery, and GPS.
Results showed that some dunes are moving at the rate of about 130 feet a year. Dunes in the region can move more than 3 feet in a single windstorm. The Grand Falls Dune Field has grown by 70% between 1992 and 2007, a period of only 15 years.
Weather stations are one of the important meteorological tools used to monitor changing climate conditions near the dunes and around the Navajo Nation.
This is a USGS weather station. This is the data logger that records what all of the instruments are seeing. We have instruments that record wind speed and direction, temperature, and over here we have soil moisture probes at different depths that give us the amount of moisture in the ground, and a tipping bucket that measures the amount of rainfall and snowfall.
Across the Navajo Nation, migrating sand dunes are threatening homes, smothering native plants, farmlands, rangelands, and roads, and some entire communities may need to relocate.
Today we're standing here on the north side of Tisto Wash.
This land was all kind of rocky though, that time though. Now it's all sand though.
As things have gotten drier and windier, many sand dunes are blowing out of the wash and are threatening the houses here. When I first came to visit the family here, I drove in on a road that's underneath these sand dunes. There were no sand dunes inside of the houses.
There used to be a road through here too.
The dunes began to appear behind the houses in 2008. Now the dune is about 100, maybe 120 feet from the house and headed towards it.
The scientists have found that dune mobility on the Navajo Nation depends on soil moisture conditions. When it is dry, either because there is less snow or rain, or because temperatures increase, there are fewer plants growing on sand dune deposits. Without this plant growth, the sandy soil is not protected from the wind, and the sand and dust just blows around. Adding to this, when streams dry out, they are an additional source of dry sediment for dunes, making dunes more common on the downwind side of streams, like at the Big Gambler property.
I chose to study sand dunes because of the impacts it's having on my family and primarily my grandparents. And I wanted to know more about what makes a sand dune move and also to look at the plant communities that covered the sand dunes.
Well, I met Leanna when she was an undergraduate student at Northern Arizona University, and she was working on a degree in Applied Indigenous Studies. I hired her as an intern, and she said, well, I'm not a scientist. I really am just studying Indigenous Studies. And I said, well, if you're interested in applied Indigenous Studies, you really should be interested in earth sciences because they're so closely connected. And then she went on to study at Purdue and get a master's degree in dune ecology.
Studying the sand dunes became a bigger interest when I saw that there was a direct link between the mobility of sand dunes, drought, and precipitation. And so I want to learn more about that, and so that's where I began my interest in the sciences.
Warming temperatures and winds cause fine-grained sand and silt to whip up into dust storms. Everyone in their path is affected.
We have dust blowing down the valley, blowing up topsoil. We also have people who have respiratory problems. And with all this dust blowing, dust pneumonia is one of our biggest worries here in the community. And we try to protect our elders and our young ones from dust pneumonia.
Adding to the consequences of drying conditions, the wind-blown dust later settles on Rocky Mountain snow, causing it to absorb more heat and making it melt more quickly. How can we know what changes have taken place over time? There are few formal scientific records for Navajo lands.
We conducted an elder study where more than 100 tribal elders aged 62 to 87 were interviewed through a Navajo translator.
We did a project with Dr. Margaret. He's consulting elders regarding climate change.
We asked what kind of experience had they had over their lifetime with changes in the weather and other kinds of changes such as plants and animals, water sources, grazing conditions, farming conditions, how they would explain them. And we really got an earful from them, mainly, why are you trying to study climate change when we already know that we have climate change?
In the 30s, it snowed more and deeper and kept the ground moist down to 5 feet.
In 1934, there were heavy rains and good crops.
We don't have that many animals no more because there's no grass. In the 40s, it snowed big every year, chest high on the horses.
In the 1940s, it rained every day. Good soaked summer rains and snow knee-deep.
I see more sand dunes where you never saw sand dunes, and you saw water level that's not there, and then you don't see the windmills and you don't see the water flowing like it did.
The elders' observations included important detail on how the drying affected things like living conditions, water availability, and plant medicines. This information supplements the science, providing a clear idea of how weather changes translate into ecosystem changes.
Our scientific research aligns with the observations of Navajo elders. For example, all of the Navajo elders discussed less rain and snow occurring today, and that the climate began to shift from wet to dry in the 1940s, and that the climate has gotten drier since 1944. And since the 1990s, there's more drought and heat. And when you look at the meteorological records, what you see is a big change in 1944 from having periodic, very, very wet years to much drier years. And since the 1990s, Here we have the current drought, where you don't get any years with really high precipitation.
This kind of two-track research, incorporating local knowledge with conventional scientific data, provides ground truthing of scientific analysis. It provides compelling information about changes that are underway due to climate change. Many of these changes are leading to cultural losses for the Navajo Nation.
There are shortages of some of the herbs, the medicines for certain plants. We now have to go past Flagstaff, a 3-hour drive one way. The plants are disappearing. They are no longer there. We're losing our tradition and culture. We're losing a lot of the stuff we used to do traditionally. Some of the ceremonies have gone extinct.
Throughout the years, Navajos have really depended on livestock and farming as a way of life. We see changes drastically. Depletion of rangelands, water sources, the quantity of water as well as the quality has gone down. We have non-native plants that are coming in, taking up the rangelands, and there's less forage for livestock.
Depleted range and increasingly scarce plants used for dyes for wool is negatively impacting Navajo weaving and the creation of Navajo rugs and blankets.
In the 1880s to the 1930s, Navajo people had a lot of sheep. There was so much sheep on the reservation. They made huge rugs. They were bringing into all the trading posts millions of pounds of wool, and so the economy ran on sheep. It's believed by Navajo people that the sheep were a gift to the Navajo people from the holy ones. The weaving is a long process. The shearing of the sheep, carding the wool, cleaning the wool, spinning it into yarn, and then go out and search for plants for that special color that you want. You've already planned in your mind the colors and possibly the patterns you want to develop to bring in for trade, and you have to go out and pick the parts of these plants when they are most potent at the best time of the season. The plants will move where the climate is ideal for them to grow. So that means the people will have to travel further out.
The Southern Navajo Nation has been continually occupied since AD 660. The recent aridity and drought here are trends that scientists expect to continue.
If we want to cope with climate change, we need to revive our relationship with the holy people and the land. And we can't revive the relationship to reproduce the way it used to be 50 years ago. But we do need to reestablish a more constructive relationship with the land, and the technical studies can help us do that. But we also need to see that traditional prayers and ways of doing things are incorporated along with the techniques that the technical studies point to.
Where are solutions to be found? Around the Navajo Nation, projects are starting on the ground.
We have been trying to implement several ways to try to rehabilitate our rangelands, and about 4,000 acres just south of many farms. These farmers and ranchers, they're aware of the climate change. They're wanting to rehabilitate the rangeland so we can keep the soil in place. And what we're trying to do is rest that land in that area so native plants can start coming back. We believe that seeds are there, they're hibernating. As long as we can rest the land, we can bring those native plants back. We're also working on a water system there, see if we can do a drip line system and start looking at windbreaks so we can hold the soil in place and see how we can bring that back.
And so with the youth interns, they're developing techniques that are low cost and very beneficial for communities or any community member to complete and initiate on their own. And so with the help of the interns, they're able to demonstrate to the community how to provide a water harvesting catchment container to hook up to their homes, and also what could be the uses of using that water that's been harvested. And another technique is also for a particular family, being able to grow their own little fruits and vegetables at home rather than you know, doing a full acreage or even larger for farming activities.
As a conservationist and working with the soil and water conservation districts across the Navajo Nation, our goal is to go into the schools and educate young people about invasive plants, about water conservation, soil conservation. Hopefully we get funding to set up some weather stations here throughout the valley as well as across the Navajo Nation. I think it's very important that we get our youth involved in monitoring our weather and understanding what climate change really is.
Our young people need to make that connection between college and tradition and put them together. And in order to do this, you have to understand both worlds to make it come together.
USGS research will provide critical data to aid the Navajo Nation in their response to the changing environment. Local knowledge is teamed with the latest science. Sensor networks and analysis can lead to techniques for mitigating sand and dune hazards. New weather stations are expanding the drought monitoring program, and experimental plots are examining new treatments to improve vegetation. Science can help the Navajo Nation to find answers to the problems posed by climate change. USGS research works in concert with tribal efforts to adapt to continuing drought.
What we're trying to do is not only for us now, this is for our people, for our children, and then for many years to go for the children, for their children. A lot of generations that we have left that we want those kids to have, that they're enjoying the Mother Earth like we are now.
Culture, tradition, our spiritual way of life, that is what keeps us going and will continue to keep us going.
I feel that the spiritual part of us, the native traditional way of life, it has to be brought back out to connect with Mother Earth and to connect with all the natural elements of life, like the wind, like the water, like the fire, and like the land.
It would be to the Navajo people's advantage to learn about climate change and take it to a personal level. How will it affect me? How will it affect my family? How will it affect our community?
If we can start doing some education out there about the planting, maybe it has to give it a little bit about history about the Mother Earth, and then the water, and then the air, and how important it is to maintain our health, and so we can take care of ourselves, so we can have a longer life.
Maybe it would be a First Nations young person that will go out into this world and get all indigenous peoples together, their ideas, their ways of dealing with climate change. They might be the ones to save this world.
It's very likely we will see more sand and dust storms and increased water shortages. And frankly, I think we'll be able to learn a lot from tribes, because tribes are on the front lines of these changes, but eventually we're all going to be facing them.